The hospital room was wrapped in silence, broken only by the rhythmic sounds of medical equipment. Grandma, pale and weak, struggled to hold the necklace that for generations had symbolized our family's unity. Her tired eyes tried to convey one last wish, but the words faltered on her lips. Beside the bed, Elena held her hand with fake concern, hiding her true intentions. I watched closely, feeling the weight of a bitter premonition. As Grandma tried to murmur her wishes, Elena leaned in closer, muffling her voice. Whispers I couldn't make out passed between them, leaving me uneasy and confused. I reached out to move closer, but Elena shot me an icy look that made me hesitate. In that moment, I realized something was being decided without me. The necklace, gleaming under the cold hospital lights, seemed to pulse like a heart about to be torn away. Soon after, a notary was called in urgently, and Elena took control of the situation with firmness. Amid rushed documents and words, she made sure the inheritance was declared in her name. Stunned, I tried to speak up, but it was as if my voice carried no weight in that room. Grandma's silence, too tired to resist, sealed my fate. The final signature echoed like a door closing, locking me out of everything that had once been mine. The feeling of powerlessness ate away at me as Elena smirked faintly at her victory. It was a cold, calculated smile, revealing how manipulation had triumphed over love. I held tightly to the small box of memories I had left, trying to find comfort in forgotten moments. But the injustice was overwhelming, and pain seeped into every part of me. At that moment, a quiet flame ignited in my heart. I would not be defeated forever. Saying goodbye to Grandma was filled with tears and silence, but also with an unbearable weight. I kissed her forehead gently, promising in my thoughts that her memory would not be forgotten. Elena, on the other hand, seemed more interested in showing off the necklace around her neck. The contrast between our expressions was striking. On one side, sincere grief. On the other, the pride of someone who thought she had won. It was only the beginning of the distance that would forever divide us. Leaving the hospital, I felt the cold night wind wrap around me, as if life itself were pushing me onto a lonely path. Elena, surrounded by people congratulating her on the inheritance, disappeared into the crowd. I stood still for a second, breathing deeply to hold back my tears. The memory box was firm in my hands, so small and fragile, yet filled with meaning. Inside it, there was perhaps more value than Elena could ever imagine. At the funeral, the atmosphere was tense with unspoken feelings. Relatives whispered about Grandma's decision, and some looked at me with pity. I walked in silence, holding the box close to my chest, while Elena showed off the necklace for everyone to see. Her triumphant attitude hurt more than any cruel words could. But deep down, I knew that moment would not be the end of my story. It was only the seed of a journey yet to unfold.
After the ceremony, I stepped away from the curious stares and sat by myself, looking for a little peace. When I opened the box, I found old letters, faded photos, and little keepsakes that held deep memories. There was no gold or precious stones inside, but every piece told a part of my family story. As I looked through those memories, I felt that, in a way, Grandma had left me something even more important, the truth hidden in the past. That night, lying in bed, I let the tears fall freely, the pain of injustice mixed with grief and a deep sense of abandonment. But through the sadness, something was growing inside me, the determination not to be defined by that loss. I didn't know how or when, but I would find my own path. And when the time came, Elena would learn that her victory wasn't forever. With a heart that was hurt but not broken, I fell asleep wrapped in uncertainty. That night, my dreams were filled with images of Grandma smiling, as if she wanted to give me courage. I woke at dawn with a quiet decision. Life had dealt me a cruel blow, but I would use that blow as a foundation to rebuild. The necklace might be in Elena's hands, but hope remained with me. You've seen how injustice marked the beginning of this story, and you want to find out how it all changes? Then subscribe to the channel now and don't miss the next chapters of this emotional journey. In the days that followed, Grandma's absence left an emptiness nothing could fill. The house we grew up in felt cold and empty, full of memories that now cut like sharp knives. Elena was already moving to take control of the properties and the fortune she'd inherited, while I watched from a distance. Every move she made felt calculated to remind me of my own insignificance. The gap between us had never been clearer. As the lawyers sorted through documents and transfers, I remained forgotten in a corner of the room. The small memory box rested on my lap, a stark contrast to the jewels and assets passing into Elena's hands. Some relatives came to comfort me, but their words felt hollow. Deep down, everyone knew nothing could change what had been decided. It was as if I had been erased from the family story. With every signature signed, I felt another piece of my heart break. Elena carried herself with an almost theatrical confidence, as if she were the star of a cruel show. She didn't hesitate to celebrate her victory in front of everyone, raising glasses and smiling as though grief was just a minor inconvenience. I stayed quiet, holding on to the hurt and the pain, but also a spark of something I couldn't yet name: resilience.
One evening, alone in my room, I opened the memory box again and paused at an old photograph. It was a picture of Grandma, still young, wearing the same necklace that now glittered around Elena's neck. Her eyes, full of life, seemed to look straight at me across time. In that moment, I felt that even without the material inheritance, I carried something much deeper, a genuine connection to our family's memory. Elena, on the other hand, seemed to drift further from affection and closer to the emptiness that money couldn't fill. She threw parties, wore expensive clothes, and traveled often, diving headfirst into a life of excess. I watched from a distance, unable to understand how someone could turn grief into showmanship so quickly. Yet that contrast began to plant a certainty in me. One day, her shallow glitter would fade. I decided then to leave my hometown, leaving behind the painful memories and the weight of injustice. I took only the memory box with me, my one true link to Grandma. I didn't have a set destination, just the desire to start over somewhere I could rebuild myself. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like my own. In the new city, I faced challenges that tested my courage and determination. I took small jobs, learned simple trades, and discovered hidden talents. Gradually, I realized my hands had a special skill for working with metals and stones, something that seemed to run in my veins. It was as though Grandma's invisible inheritance was blooming in me in an unexpected way. With every piece of jewelry I created, I felt a connection to the past and a glimpse of the future. They weren't luxurious pieces, but they carried unique meaning and beauty. Customers began to notice my dedication, and little by little, my name spread. The memory box, always with me, became the source of inspiration that kept Grandma's memory alive. While Elena shone in the society pages, I grew quietly, far from the spotlight. The gap between us only widened. She chased fleeting applause, while I built something solid and lasting. Even if the world didn't know it yet, I was creating something far more valuable than any inheritance. It was the beginning of a transformation that would change everything. On that solitary journey, I also found a strength I never knew I had. I learned that pain could be fuel and that abandonment could become momentum. Even though the wound of injustice was still there, I no longer saw myself as a victim. I was a survivor, and life was beginning to show me that my real wealth wasn't in what I'd been given, but in what I could build. Time passed, and my life took shape through daily effort. I woke up early, worked late, and saved every penny like it was gold. The pain from the past was still with me, but now it blended with a growing sense of resolve. With every challenge I overcame, I felt myself being rebuilt. The emptiness left by injustice was slowly being filled by a new kind of strength. It was in a small workshop that I discovered my true calling. I started by cleaning, organizing tools, and watching master jewelers at work. At first, no one paid me much attention, but I paid close attention to every detail. Over time, I learned to polish, shape, and bring unique pieces to life. The sparkle of gemstones and the feel of metal became my secret language.
My hands, calloused from hard work, gained a gentle and precise touch. I could turn worthless fragments into delicate jewelry, and every piece I created seemed to carry a part of my story. Memories of my grandmother inspired me, her soft voice, her advice, her tender gaze. As I worked, I felt I was honoring her memory. The memory box, always by my side, was my constant guiding light. My first clients came to me almost by chance. An older woman was charmed by a ring I had made for practice and insisted on buying it. Later, she brought her friends, and soon, my small customer network began to grow. Word of mouth was more powerful than any advertisement could ever be. With every piece I delivered, I offered not just a piece of jewelry, but a story. It was that difference that won people over. While I was growing stronger, Elena was sinking deeper into her life of excess. Her luxurious parties were featured in magazines, but rumors about her growing debts also started to surface. I didn't go looking for news about her, but it found me anyway. When I read those headlines, I didn't just feel hurt anymore. I felt sorry for her. She had everything, but she didn't know how to take care of any of it. The workshop became my sanctuary, a place where I could create without fear. There, the past didn't hold me back, and the future seemed full of possibilities. Every finished piece was a quiet victory, a step toward an empire I didn't yet realize I was building. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone, but deep down, I knew my journey would lead me back to justice. Little by little, I started saving up to open my own atelier. The dream seemed distant, but every piece of jewelry I sold brought me closer to that goal. I worked through the nights, sketching designs and trying out new techniques. Patience was my greatest ally, and I understood that nothing gets built overnight. Unlike Elena, I knew the value of waiting. Some close friends encouraged me, saying my pieces had soul. That word resonated with me. I wasn't just making jewelry. I was creating symbols of overcoming hardship, of love, and of memory. It was as if my own life was being polished and refined, along with every stone I shaped. A quiet rebirth was underway, invisible to the world, but profoundly transformative. Despite the progress, there were still nights when the pain from the past came back with full force. I would cry quietly, remembering the injustice I had suffered and the distance between me and my sister. But those tears were no longer a sign of weakness. They were fuel. The next morning, I would wake up renewed, ready to turn that pain into beauty. The workshop was my altar of resilience. And so, my name began to quietly make its way in the jewelry world. It wasn't fame, but genuine recognition. Every larger order brought more confidence, and every satisfied customer was a step toward the future. I was just getting started, but something inside me already knew my work would be the key to the final reckoning that fate still had in store.
I hope this translation captures the spirit and emotion of your story. If you'd like to adjust the tone or focus on any specific part, just let me know.
The years piled up like gemstones,
carefully polished with patience. My small atelier grew into a respected boutique, attracting discerning clients. My name began appearing in specialized magazines, and invitations to international exhibitions started coming in. I, the forgotten daughter, was carving out a place in a world that once felt completely out of reach. But I still preferred quiet over the glare of the spotlight. My strategy was clear: to build without fanfare, to grow without drawing Elena's attention. I knew that sooner or later our paths would cross again. Until then, I wanted to be ready, with a foundation that was solid and unshakable. So I reinvested every profit, hired talented artisans, and quietly expanded my empire. It was a silent endeavor, but a grand one. The memory box remained my good luck charm. In moments of doubt, I would open it and relive moments with my grandmother. One letter in particular, written in her shaky handwriting, said, "True wealth lies in what you build, not in what you're given." Those words became my motto, etched into my mind like an indestructible jewel. Over time, my brand became known for its authenticity. While many jewelers focused only on flashiness, I created pieces that told stories. This approach won over not just clients, but also collectors and art critics. The name that once meant nothing in the market was now synonymous with elegance and truth. Meanwhile, Elena was sliding down the opposite path. The inheritance she received was slowly draining away through uncontrolled spending. Luxury cars, extravagant parties, and constant trips were eating away at her wealth. I would quietly read about her life in the society pages and see a portrait of someone who didn't know how to tell wealth from vanity. Her empire was built on sand, ready to collapse at any moment. Even so, I wasn't looking for immediate revenge. My focus was on growing, on making each achievement solid and unshakable. I knew life would deliver justice when the time was right. Time was my ally, and with each passing day, I moved further from being a victim and closer to being the one who came out on top. Elena still had no idea about the strength I had gathered in silence. My hard work also earned me respect among other artisans. They saw in me not just a business owner, but someone who understood the heart of the craft. This connection made me stronger because I wasn't alone. I had a loyal team by my side who believed in the same work philosophy. Together, we transformed raw materials into art. During lonely evenings, I would reflect on the irony of fate. Elena, who had inherited everything, was getting lost in vanity. I, who was left with only memories, was turning nothing into everything. It was as if the universe wanted to show the difference between having and deserving. This understanding gave me peace, even though I knew a confrontation between us was still to come. Despite my growth, I avoided any public display that might catch Elena's eye. I didn't want her to see me as a threat before the right moment. My game was one of patience, and the sweetest victory would be the one that arrived inevitably, without any rush. I knew how to wait, and that skill had become my greatest weapon.
And so I kept building my hidden empire. On the surface, I was just another successful jeweler, but on the inside, I was the true heir to my grandmother's wisdom. Time had shaped me, pain had made me stronger, and injustice had become my fuel. I was ready for the day life would bring us face to face again. While my name was quietly gaining recognition in the jewelry world, Elena was starting to feel the weight of her own choices. Her extravagant spending made the society pages, but now the headlines came with rumors of debt. The inheritance that had seemed endless was disappearing right before her eyes. Still, she pretended for everyone that nothing had changed. The parties continued, but they'd lost their sparkle. Guests who used to come all the time began to drift away, sensing that the displayed luxury was covering up some cracks. Elena's smile grew more forced, a mask about to slip. Behind the flawless makeup were dark circles and signs of worry. The image of the powerful woman was slowly crumbling. Luxury cars were sold, properties mortgaged, yet she still refused to face reality. Her pride was stronger than any common sense. She'd rather sink deeper into debt than lower her standard of living. The family necklace, once flaunted as a symbol of her victory, no longer drew looks of admiration, but ones of suspicion and envy. Time was collecting its due. Meanwhile, I continued on my quiet path. I'd read about her life in the news, without feeling bitterness, just a strange sense of distance. It was like watching a play whose ending I already knew. Elena was digging her own ruin, while I was strengthening every foundation I had built. Our destinies were pulling further apart, like lines that would never cross peacefully again. Even in her decline, Elena wouldn't let go of her pride. On the rare occasions our paths crossed at social events, she would look down on me, pretending disdain. But her eyes betrayed her unease. Maybe she sensed I wasn't the helpless sister of the past anymore. The silence I kept made her uncomfortable, as if she could feel something bigger coming. In the public's eyes, she was still the privileged heiress, but to her creditors, she had become a problematic debtor. The pressure was mounting, and with each new crisis, she grew more aggressive and unpredictable. This was the same Elena as always, unable to admit mistakes, ready to blame anyone but herself for her failures. And I knew that sooner or later, that anger would be directed at me. Some people still believe, deep down, that Elena could turn things around. Old friends tried to advise her, but she pushed them away without a second thought. She couldn't stand criticism, much less admit she was vulnerable. With every door she closed, she became more isolated, trapped in a world of her own illusions. The pride that had once given her an advantage had now become her prison. The irony was clear. Elena had inherited everything, but was losing it all. I had inherited almost nothing, but was building something solid. The contrast between us grew starker by the day. And though I didn't wish for it, I knew fate was preparing an inevitable reunion. Elena wouldn't rest until she found someone to blame for her downfall.
I dreaded the moment she would turn her attention to me, but I didn't shy away from the thought. On the contrary, I prepared for it. I kept evidence, documents, and memories that could change any narrative. I didn't yet know how they would be used, but I knew they were priceless. Once again, time would be my ally. While my empire grew in silence, hers was crumbling in public view. Elena's decline wasn't just financial, but also moral and social. She had lost the respect of many, and soon she would lose the little she had left. It was only a matter of time before the wound she herself had opened began to bleed irreversibly. The day arrived when I least expected it. I received a legal notification in my office from Elena. She was suing me, claiming the necklace she inherited from our grandmother was fake and demanding millions in compensation. For a few seconds, I sat in absolute silence, unable to believe the absurdity of what I was reading. It was as if the past had come back to collect its debt. Holding those papers, I felt a mix of anger and relief. Anger at Elena's audacity to blame me for something I never had. Relief because the moment of reckoning had finally arrived. I didn't need much time to decide. I would face the lawsuit head-on, without fear. The justice that had been denied to me was now within reach. In her petition, Elena accused me of swapping the original necklace for a forgery. The story was absurd, but crafted well enough to cause confusion. Her lawyers were trying to paint me as a jealous sister, willing to sabotage an inheritance I had never accepted. It was a direct attack on the reputation I had worked so hard to build. But I knew I was prepared.
I sat at my desk and opened the memory box once more. Inside were documents I had kept for decades, letters and recordings that could change everything. Among them was a tape with our grandmother's voice where she explained her true wishes. This detail, overlooked by Elena, would be my greatest weapon. Fate had placed all the pieces on the board. I called my lawyers and showed them the evidence I had gathered over the years. They looked at each other in surprise, recognizing the weight of those documents. The case Elena believed would be her triumph would in fact be her ruin. For the first time in a long while, I felt I wasn't just reacting, I was in control. Meanwhile, the headlines were announcing the lawsuit with great fanfare. "Millionaire heiress sues sister for fraud," the newspaper said. My reputation was being questioned, but I refused to be shaken. The silence I had maintained for so many years was about to be broken in the most impactful way possible, before everyone, with the truth as my shield. With every step in preparing for the trial, the tension grew. We gathered witnesses, analyzed details, and organized evidence. Elena, for her part, appeared on camera with a confident smile, as if she had already won. I watched her from a distance, knowing that behind the mask was desperation. Her game was about to be over.
The nights leading up to the hearing felt endless. I went over every detail of the past in my mind, every injustice, every tear I'd cried. Now it all made sense. The pain I had carried for so many years would become my strength in that courtroom. With every deep breath, I felt more ready for the confrontation. I knew the trial wasn't just about a fake necklace. It was a clash between two lives shaped by opposite choices, hers by greed, mine by resilience. It wasn't just about legal evidence, but about a truth that had withstood the test of time. The courtroom would be the stage for our final reckoning, and I was ready to step onto it. And so, with the documents in my hands and a steady heart, I accepted the challenge. Elena thought she was setting a trap for me, but she was actually walking straight into her own downfall. This unexpected lawsuit didn't frighten me. It was a chance I had waited 20 years for. The days before the hearing were intense. My office turned into a war room, with every detail analyzed precisely. My lawyers urged me to stay calm, but I knew I would need more than just evidence. I would need courage. This trial wasn't just about documents. It was about 20 years of silence and pain, all about to come to light. I spent whole nights reviewing my grandmother's recording, listening to her trembling voice repeat her true wishes. Each word was like an embrace across time, renewing my certainty that she had never wanted the injustice I suffered. That audio was my greatest weapon, but also my heaviest emotional burden. Using it meant exposing our family's most intimate secrets in front of strangers. Besides the recording, I gathered sales receipts proving Elena had gotten rid of the real necklace years earlier. Signed contracts, receipts from antique dealers, even statements from people who had been there. With every piece of evidence added to the case, the net tightened around her. My heart wavered between anxiety and relief. The newspapers, however, painted a different picture. Headlines talked about sibling rivalry, jealousy, and envy. Some columnists accused me of trying to destroy Elena's reputation. I read every line with a knot in my throat, but I took a deep breath. I wasn't fighting for public approval, but for justice. Sooner or later, the truth would speak louder. The night before the trial, I opened the memory box and found an old photo, Elena and me as children, hugging in front of our grandmother. For a few moments, my anger gave way to a longing for what we could have been. But soon the image became painful. The sister I had known was gone. All that remained was a shadow, consumed by greed. Looking out the window that night, I felt the full weight of my responsibility. I wasn't just defending my honor, but also our grandmother's memory. I could not fail. I could not waver. This trial would be the climax of a story that began 2 decades ago, and I was ready to face it, even if it cost me the last of my strength. My lawyers prepared me for every question, every potential trick. They taught me to breathe deeply, to respond calmly, and not to be shaken by provocations. I knew Elena would use every possible trick to throw me off balance, but inside me, there was an unexpected serenity. It was as if I had been waiting my whole life for this moment.
In the quiet of the early morning, I rehearsed my words in my head. I remembered all the times I had been humiliated, rejected, and forgotten. Each one of those memories now became fuel to keep my posture strong before the judge. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. And justice requires strength. Before going to sleep, I placed the photo of my grandmother by my bedside. I closed my eyes and asked for strength, as if she could still hear me. Sleep came lightly, almost symbolically, like a transition between the pain of the past and the hope for the future. I knew that when I woke up, the battle would be about to begin. And so at dawn, I dressed not only in my most elegant clothes, but also in the invisible armor of courage. The courtroom awaited me, and with it the moment that would forever change my family's destiny. The courtroom was packed when I arrived. Journalists, spectators, and even old acquaintances jostled to watch the confrontation. Cameras flashed non-stop, capturing my every step to the defendant's table. I felt my heart race, but I kept my gaze steady. I was no longer the helpless girl Elena had humiliated in the past. Elena entered shortly after, surrounded by lawyers and carrying herself with her usual arrogance. She wore expensive clothes, but her face showed clear tension. Still, she smiled for the cameras as if she were the star of a show. I watched her quietly, trying to see past the mask. What I saw was fear, disguised as pride. The session began with her lawyer's opening statement. He portrayed her as the victim of a cruel fraud, accusing me of conspiring to replace her as the rightful heir. His words were sharp, and at times they sounded almost convincing. The audience murmured, divided between believing her story or waiting for my defense. My lawyer asked to speak, and with calm clarity laid out the initial facts. He highlighted my history of honest work, my lack of interest in the material inheritance, and the inconsistencies in Elena's accusations. Then, he presented preliminary evidence that cast doubt on her version of events. The court was beginning to see that the story wasn't so simple. During the break, I felt the weight of everyone's eyes on me. Some reporters surrounded me, asking if I held a grudge against my sister. I took a deep breath before answering that I wasn't fighting for revenge, but for justice. My words resonated more than I expected, spreading on social media as a stark contrast to Elena's display of vanity.
In the second part of the hearing, I was called to testify. I walked to the stand with firm steps, despite my racing heart. I told my version of the events, recalling every detail from our grandmother's deathbed. I described Elena's manipulation, the memory box that was all I had left, and my journey of overcoming. My words weren't rehearsed, they were true.
On the other side, Elena kept rolling her eyes, trying to shrug off everything I said. But the public seemed captivated by my story. Some were even moved, seeing in me not just a litigant, but someone bearing the deep scars of an injustice. For the first time, I felt that public opinion was shifting in my favor. Her lawyer tried to rattle me with aggressive questions. He challenged my motives, hinted at jealousy, and attempted to paint me as opportunistic. But every answer I gave was firm and calm, slowly dismantling their strategy. I didn't need to raise my voice. The truth was on my side, and that was evident in my every gesture. When the session ended, I sat down again, exhausted but confident. The first clash had shown that the battle would be wrong, but not impossible. Elena still believed she would win, but her confidence no longer seemed so unshakable. There were cracks in her facade,
and I knew that with patience, they would become irreparable fractures. As I left the courthouse, I held my head high for the cameras, not because I wanted fame, but because I had nothing left to hide. The world now knew I was willing to fight, and so did Elena. The war had begun, and I was ready for every round that would follow. In the days after the first confrontation, Elena intensified her offensive. Her lawyers spread rumors in the press, trying to tarnish my reputation. Headlines suggested I had forged evidence and that my success in the jewelry business was due to questionable practices. It was a calculated attack, playing out not just in the courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. With every new story, I felt the pressure mount. Clients called me, concerned. Investors hesitated to close contracts. Elena knew exactly where to strike, not just at the lawsuit, but at my work, my source of dignity. It was a dirty game, and she didn't hesitate to play it. But unlike her, I had something she could never have: the truth. During a new hearing, Elena presented witnesses who tried to support her version of events, people who were paid to say I had always been jealous of her position in the family and that I had motives for faking the necklace. My lawyer dismantled each statement with concrete evidence, but the emotional toll was inevitable. I wondered how far she would go to destroy me. During a break, she approached me for the first time in years. With a venomous smile, she whispered, "You'll never win, because I will always be one step ahead." Her voice was a perfect picture of the arrogance that had always guided her. I took a deep breath and responded only with silence. I knew her words were merely a disguise for her own fear. The media soaked up every detail, turning our legal battle into a spectacle. TV shows exploited our story as a family drama, dividing public opinion. Some saw me as a victim, others as an opportunist. Elena loved the exposure, as if every camera fueled her vanity. For me, it was just one more ordeal to endure. Despite the smear campaign, I stood my ground. I presented new evidence of my professional journey, contracts, awards I had won, and respected clients who testified to my integrity. Every document was a solid stone in the wall of defense I was building against her lies. With every small victory, my confidence grew.
But the emotional strain was very real. At night, alone in my room, I felt the full weight of the accusations. I asked myself if it was truly worth exposing so much of our family's private life. Then, I would remember my grandmother's voice on the recording, urging me to be strong. That thought alone would lift me back up, turning my tears into pure determination. The courtroom was increasingly becoming a stage for psychological warfare. Elena would parade in luxurious clothes, trying to project an image of superiority, while I carried myself with quiet discretion. The contrast between us was evident. She was seeking a spectacle, and I was seeking justice. The public was starting to notice this distinction, and it was getting under her skin. Her lawyers kept attacking my character, but with every response, my team would present solid evidence that weakened their accusations. It was a battle of patience, and time was on my side. Elena, growing impatient, began to make mistakes and contradict her own statements. The cracks in her story were becoming visible for all to see. By the end of that week, I realized the war wasn't just happening in the courtroom. It was also raging inside me. I had to resist the temptation to fight back with hatred. I needed to hold on to who I was, because keeping my integrity intact would be my real victory. Elena could play dirty, but I would win with my dignity. That day, I presented my most powerful evidence to the court, my grandmother's recording. Her fragile voice echoed through the room as she declared her true wish for the inheritance to be divided fairly. The impact was immediate. The crowd fell silent, and Elena turned pale, unable to hide her shock. She tried to discredit the tape, but expert reports confirmed it was authentic. It was backed up by letters from my grandmother that reinforced every word. Elena's entire story began to crumble right there in front of everyone. The judge acknowledged the importance of the evidence and scheduled a new hearing to look into it more deeply. Elena rushed out humiliated, while I remained calm, knowing that the truth was finally on my side. At the next hearing, I presented the documents that proved Elena had sold the real necklace years earlier. A buyer even came forward as a witness, confirming the purchase and describing the details of the original jewel. The courtroom was completely silent. Expert analysts examined the necklace she had now and revealed to everyone that it was a crude fake. Elena's charade was dismantled in a matter of seconds. She tried to make excuses, but her words rang hollow. Everyone could now see the truth. The lost necklace wasn't just an object, it was the symbol of her downfall. With no arguments left, Elena lost her composure in the courtroom. She alternated between incoherent accusations and desperate apologies, but nobody believed her anymore. Her embarrassed silence in the face of the evidence was the worst condemnation of all.
As she left, Elena faced the reporters and reacted with pure rage, shoving microphones away. The next day, newspapers and social media platforms broadcast her humiliation for everyone to see. I, in contrast, left the courthouse in silence, with the certainty that the end was near. Elena's mask had slipped, and justice was about to be served. The courtroom was packed on the day of the verdict. The judge recognized my grandmother's recording as authentic and confirmed that Elena had sold the original necklace, replacing it with a fake. Her lawsuit was dismissed. Elena broke down in tears in front of everyone, utterly defeated. The judge also ordered her to pay court costs and compensation for damages. The woman who had inherited everything now had nothing left but shame. I left the courthouse with a sense of peace, knowing it wasn't about revenge, but about justice. After 20 years, the truth had finally prevailed. In the days that followed, I avoided interviews and celebrations. All I wanted was peace. Elena disappeared from public life, while my work took on a new meaning. Every piece of jewelry I made became a symbol of overcoming. There were still nights of melancholy, wondering how things between us could have been different. But a forgotten letter from my grandmother brought me comfort. Quiet can be its own victory, as long as it brings you peace. With time, I came to accept that my true inheritance wasn't the necklace, but the memories of my grandmother and the strength that had guided me. Elena faded into obscurity, and I moved forward, transforming my pain into a legacy. In my workshop, young apprentices saw me as an example. During speaking engagements, I shared my story as a lesson in resilience. The past couldn't be erased, but it could be transformed. And so I finally understood. I was no longer the forgotten sister, but the heir to the truth. Justice had been done, and in place of the pain, a deep serenity was born. And so, after 20 years, the truth conquered the lies and justice was finally served. If this story held your attention until the very end, imagine how many more I have to share. Subscribe to the channel now and tune in to experience every one of these family sagas with me, stories that move you, surprise you, and stay with you forever.